What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Takeover. Today, we're going to be covering a potential solution to the issues we've been having here in California when it comes to wildfires and rolling blackouts that result from it, power outages and whatnot, and also the dire situation that's ever evolving in Texas with their winter storm and the blackouts that resulted from that. People without heat, people without energy for days. Now there's people without water because I think the water pipes have been bursting, people having to boil water. It's really a dire situation. So I was looking for solutions on how we could solve and prevent something like this from happening ever again in the future. And someone on Twitter sent me a great website that was NewYorkPublicPower.com. And so we're going to read up a little bit on Public Power New York Coalition, what they're fighting for, and how this maybe can be a good example for what we need all across the country. So let's jump right into it. The Public Power New York Coalition is a collection of grassroots organizations, nonprofits, and labor groups across New York focused on the shared goal of clean, renewable, affordable, accessible, and democratically controlled public power in New York State. We do not believe that basic needs such as water, power, and heating should be controlled by private companies with little oversight. That's spot on, and I think we're seeing exactly what happens when you allow that to happen within these states, when you allow private companies with no oversight and a profit motive to be, the ones deciding who's going to get power, who's not going to get power, whether the grid is going to be diversified or not, whether we're going to be relying solely on natural gas and coal and oil, even as these inclement weather events and climate change worsens these situations for people in these different parts of the country. Julie Johnson on Twitter reported that ERCOT, which I believe is the governing body and regulating body for energy within Texas, and the state government did not properly winterize the state's various generation systems because they didn't want to spend the money. These include outside power plants, wind turbines, and fortifying gas pipelines. Multi-system failure and millions suffer. Right? These is exactly what we saw. And I think about a decade ago, they were warned that they need to winterize their infrastructure because of something like a winter storm hit Texas. People would lose power. They wouldn't be able to, get the energy to this within the system to the people who needed it the most. And this is exactly what's going on in Texas, and exactly why we need something like New York Public Power. So we're going to keep reading exactly what they're fighting for. So Public Power New York says investor-owned utilities who must primarily answer to shareholders and therefore profit can neither deliver an effective nor a just plan to address the urgent challenges of the climate crisis. Residents are continually exploited with unaffordable rates, unnecessary rate hikes, and poor service, while the maintenance of energy grids are subject to disastrous negligence. I mean, that's what we saw in Texas. They've had a negligent response to calls to winterize and retrofit their infrastructure. It resulted in residents, mostly poor and marginalized residents, but all residents at some points, being subject to unaffordable rates, unnecessary rate hikes, and that poor service, exactly what New York Public Power is talking about. And on Twitter, Matt Oben pointed out that the price for electricity in Texas spiked from $22 per kilowatt hour to $10,000 per kilowatt hour simply because people needed it not to die. But please tell me how capitalism is noble and prevents human suffering. See, that's what's funny is they always claim that it's not capitalism, it's socialism or it's communism or it's something else that is causing all the problems, that is causing all this human suffering. But we're seeing it right here in Texas, in one of the biggest states, that this exact thing that they claim that socialism and communism and all these other things are doing is what capitalism is doing to these people. There are people that have gone without heat, without water for days in the richest country in the world. And that's all because of policy decisions that policymakers within Texas, people like Ted Cruz, people like Greg Abbott, made, and now people are suffering because of that. So this is why we can't leave things like energy and water and heat up to private companies, up to corporations who have a bottom line, who have a profit motive, which means that if they make less money, someone is actually getting heat, someone is actually getting power. And if they have to make that decision to retrofit and upgrade their infrastructure or to keep making more money in the short term, you know exactly the decision they're going to make. And they make those decisions time after time, year after year, and then eventually it comes back and bites them in the ass. But they're not really the ones that suffer the most. The ones that suffer the most are the people who can't just find a hotel at $500 a night, or people who can't just travel to see their family somewhere else because it's the middle of a pandemic and they don't have any money because the government hasn't supported them. This is why you can't leave things like this up to corporations and up in the air. You have to take things like that off the table. Public Power New York continues saying, like water, access to clean energy is a basic right. That's exactly right. And we're seeing why it's a basic right now in Texas. Furthermore, the transition to clean energy cannot be successful without making it affordable so that it's adopted at a large scale. A publicly owned, democratically controlled energy system is not only more just, it will also be cheaper, safer, and better positioned to transition to the renewable energy economy we need. I mean, I can't give you a better example of why everything they're fighting for is exactly spot on right, and we should be pushing for this at every single turn. Because when you, like I said, when you leave it up to chance, when you leave it up to corporations and the corporate state, poor people and people who can't afford to have this energy, and really just everyone in the state is being affected by this right now. It's not just poor and marginalized people. They're getting hit the hardest, but it's everyone. And so they're really screwing over everyone for the small, the profits of a small number of individuals. And that's not right. That's not just. And that's why something like energy and power and water should be completely taken off the table in a civilized society. David Knoll reacted to, I guess this is a professor of global energy policy at Harvard's Kennedy School, Mr. Hogan, to what he said. And what he said was this. He acknowledged that while many Texans have struggled this week without heat and electricity, not just struggle, there's people who have died. And I want to emphasize that. Sometimes I feel like people just become numbers, or people just become like headlines. And those are real people, real lives, real families. Some who have perished because of policy decisions. And this didn't have to happen. This was preventable. And he says the state's energy market has functioned as it was designed. And he's right. It was designed to function like this. And it can be and should be designed to function in a different way to prevent this from happening. But we have to fight for that, because if we don't, then things like this, because, politicians are in the pocket of corporations, John Cornyn, Ted Cruz, Greg Abbott, they're all in the pocket of the big oil industry within Texas. They allowed something like this to happen. They designed the system. They designed that energy market. It wasn't just designed in the ether. It wasn't just made, within the atmosphere. No, there was people that made certain decisions to design the system to function like this. That also means that it can be designed in a different fashion. That's exactly what New York Public Power is fighting for, and that's exactly why I want to give them this platform right here. Hogan continues saying that design relies on basic economics. When electricity demand increases, so too does the price for power. The higher prices force consumers to reduce energy use to prevent cascading failures of power plants that could leave the entire state in the dark, while encouraging power plants to generate more electricity. It's not convenient, it's not nice, but it's necessary. And see, that's where he's completely wrong. One, he says it relies on basic economics. No, it relies on basic, extreme, capitalism economics. It doesn't just rely on basic economics everywhere. People in other countries aren't experiencing this same thing. I think sometimes people get confused and think that America is the only the country in the entire world. No, it doesn't have to be like this. We've made it like this, but we can also change it. It's completely not necessary. Completely not necessary. And if we pass things like New York Public Power is fighting for, then the system will be different. It won't fail in times of crisis like this. And that's exactly why we need to be pushing for that. Stuck in Nowhere Zero on Twitter, I think, put it perfectly. They said Texas infrastructure has been poor for ages. With increased growth, you'd think the state would have prioritized expanding and repairing old infrastructure, especially energy. Every summer, we get to near overloading the grid. It's an aged system that they refuse to fix. And that's completely right. I think over a decade ago, Texas was told you need to upgrade your energy system. Otherwise, when an inclement weather comes, the system might completely fail and people be left out in the cold and dark. Exactly what happened. They ignored it because of short-term profits. And if things like this continue to happen, poor communities are going to continue to get hit the hardest. Working people are going to continue to get hit the hardest. When it's a choice between whether a wealthy business center is going to be given heat and power, or a residential neighborhood of working class people, you already know who's making that decision and who they're going to make that decision for. Balaji online, I think, put it perfectly. She said, I don't even have words to describe how awful things are down here in Texas. People are freezing to death in their homes and cars. No clean water or food anywhere. Government refusing to even acknowledge what's happening. I have never experienced anything like this in my life. Guys, this is simply what happens when you leave things up to capitalists and capitalism as a system. Things that should be taken off the table completely. Things like energy, things like heat, things like water. In a civilized society, in the richest nation in the world, there's no way things like this should be happening. There's no way. And if we want to design a system to prevent things like this from happening, we're going to have to fight for it, because they're definitely not just going to give it to us. In fact, powerful people in Texas like Ted Cruz are actually going to take a flight to Cancun in the midst of one of the worst crises in recent Texas history. He's going to take his family and get the hell out of Dodge. And that's unacceptable. That's abhorrent. He should be replaced. I don't know if he will be, but he should be replaced as soon as possible, whenever his next election is up, because this is unacceptable. He has a lot of power in his hands. He can ensure this. He and people and representatives in that state can ensure this doesn't happen again. But if they're just flying to Cancun while people are freezing to death and having to boil water, I don't think he's going to fight for that, because he doesn't even see that this is an issue, apparently, because he's not even in the state right now. So why would he ever fight to change it? So let's go over the legislation that, at least the overview of the legislation that New York Public Power is fighting for. The two bills I think they're going to be up in the New York legislature in 2021 are New York Build Public Renewables Act and the New York Utility Democracy Act. Just an overview of those two acts. The Public Power New York Statewide Coalition will be introducing two bills this year to move New York State to the 100% renewable, democratically controlled, publicly owned energy system we need in order to lead the nation on climate. Our energy system is currently divided into three distinct sections: generation, transmission, and distribution. Passing both the New York Build Public Renewables Act and the New York Utility Democracy Act will bring all of New York State's generation, transmission, and distribution under public ownership. This is vitally important, and it's necessary. If we really want to prevent things like this from happening in the future, we need to have public ownership of the energy grid, of these utilities. No one should in this country should ever have to go without power, heat, and energy, whether it's in the dead of winter or right in the middle of the summer in a desert or something. There's no way anyone should ever have to go without that. And if we have public ownership of these utilities, if we fight for this, then we can get this done. I encourage and implore everyone in New York State to make sure you support these bills when they come up this year. Pressure your politicians to make sure they sign on to these bills. This could be huge. This could be a beacon of light. This could help be an example for the rest of the country. We need to have solidarity with those people in New York who are fighting for this. I know at the national level, we don't get a lot of wins. There's not a whole lot of hope, but if we can organize people on a local level, if we can get some of these local bills passed, people see the advantages of having public ownership of utilities, of having single payer healthcare, things like that. If we can get those things passed on a local level while still fighting for them on a national level, it might be, a way to help the movement on a national level, really open people's eyes, illuminate to folks who might not be on board with it exactly why we need it. I think this video is important. I hope people in Texas who may not, think this is a good idea and are now feeling the effects of that system failure can start to get on board with things like what Public Power New York is fighting for.